you believe they should be stronger. What do you believe this White House should be doing specifically to support the Ukrainians?
Well, first, I think the president has done two things correctly. So let's give him credit. First, he's made it abundantly clear that under no circumstances will our ground forces cross the Polish border into Ukraine, because he recognizes that would precipitate all-out war with Russia. Mm-hmm. Secondly, he's absolutely refused to entertain the idea of a no-fly zone for the same reason. We'd end up losing aircraft and pilots, and we would be at war with Russia. And in that connection, the notion that we could somehow or another mysteriously and secretly fly aircraft from Poland or Romania or somewhere else by Ukrainian pilots into Ukraine to help them with the war would result in essentially the same thing. So I think he's done the right thing, because we have no interest becoming involved in a war with Russia over what is happening in Ukraine. Now, beyond that, he doesn't seem to exert a great deal of control or influence over his government, let alone any leadership on the Hill, because we have an inexhaustible number of people who are trying desperately to precipitate conflict with Russia over Ukraine. And that's the last thing we want to do. What he should be doing is urging an end to the fighting, and tell the Ukrainian president that first and foremost, he should immediately accept neutrality and renounce any further interest in joining NATO. That's a precondition for anything good to happen as a result of this event. There are two more conditions that the Russians have stipulated. One involves recognizing the Russian independence of the Russian provinces in the Donbass, and also renouncing any further interest in Crimea, which has never been part of Ukraine. Those are easy conditions to meet, but for some reason he's resisting. And I think he's resisting because he's being told by people in the West to continue resisting.
Yeah, I agree with you that I think that there are a number of people in this administration who are seeking to widen the conflict in Ukraine without any question whatsoever. I also think that the Republican senators, 40 of them, who want to give MiG-29s, Polish MiGs, to the Ukrainians, have lost their minds. This is government by cute on the part of those Republican senators. Do you not agree?
Well, let's face it, most of these politicians on any given day on any policy want to be a little bit pregnant. The problem is that you're not going to end up a little bit pregnant. You're going to end up in a lot of trouble if you do those things. And they don't seem to appreciate the dangers involved. I listen to people insist, oh, the Russians are weak, the Russians are that. Mm-hmm. They have no idea what's been going on the ground. And the Russian army has behaved, in my judgment, very capably and very professionally, but they have moved slowly because Putin has demanded it, because he's wanted to eliminate or reduce civilian casualties. If you're going to reduce civilian casualties, you cannot run a scorched earth campaign. And he doesn't want that, because ultimately Putin wants to live with the people in Ukraine after this is over. We seem intent on depicting him and the Russians as perfectly evil, deserving of the worst. And this is a very counterproductive position to take right now.
It is counterproductive if the purpose of that rhetoric is to find some common ground and to be very accommodating. At this point, Colonel, I have to point out that this is an invasion by the Russian army at the orders of Vladimir Putin. And when I look at the video, and I realize that the video is selective and it doesn't portray a general picture necessarily, but it's devastating what those missiles, those rockets, and the shelling have produced in Ukraine, from Mariupol to Kiev. It's devastating. So I don't understand exactly how you liberate a people as you shell them, bomb them, and send in rockets and missiles on a daily basis. What could possibly be the objective of that military strategy?
Well, the objective is to destroy Ukrainian forces, and they are doing that, albeit slowly for the reasons I cited. Right now, the vast majority, 90% of Ukrainian forces are encircled, cut off in various towns and cities where they've taken refuge.
Right.
Intermingling with the civil populace, in some cases using the civil populace as shields, in other cases not. But particularly in Mariupol, they very definitely are using the civilian population as a shield. And then there is a large pocket of 60,000 Ukrainian forces encircled in southern Ukraine. They are going to be slowly but systematically pulverized out of existence unless Zelensky accepts the conditions. The Russians did not invade suddenly or in a surprise move by any stretch of the imagination. The government has made it clear since 2007 that they will not allow Ukraine to be turned into a platform for attack against Russia. We have been working overtime to turn Ukraine into a hostile camp. And their greatest concern was we would ultimately move missiles and troops in there. We're also neglecting that there's been a war going on in eastern Ukraine since 2014, and 14,000 people have died, thousands of Russians who live in the Donbass. And Putin has made it very clear he's not going to stand by and watch those Russians be slaughtered. And again, Russians have been second-class citizens in Ukraine. And he has asked repeatedly for fair treatment of the Russians that live on Ukrainian soil. And again, that's been rejected. So we have a very one-sided view of things. And I think it's unhelpful. What we should be interested in doing is ending this thing. We don't want these people to kill each other. We don't want another war on the European continent. So we should host a conference, and we should start by saying Ukraine will be neutral. We don't need it in NATO. We never did. There's no requirement for it. There's no need for it. And if you neutralize it, it becomes a wonderful buffer between Russia and NATO, which we should all welcome.
I don't know that we should welcome, though, the argument that a buffer is required. I mean, when we think about how close Alaska is to Russia, I mean, we have a small strait there that is a buffer, but why is a buffer necessary? And why is this such a big deal? Because point of fact, there is great proximity between enemies and friends all over the world.
Well,
I mean,
remember
I don't see
that
why Russia gets a demand like that just as a matter of default.
Well, remember that he pointed out early on that he would not tolerate the presence of missiles in eastern Ukraine that could reach Moscow in a matter of minutes.
Mm-hmm.
It's very similar to the missiles that were placed in Cuba that could reach the United States in a matter of minutes in 1963. Only today, you're talking about far more sophisticated and capable weapons.
Absolutely.
We are quite willing to do that and have made it clear that we would make Ukraine a member of NATO, a full-fledged member. We put our forces on the ground in Ukraine to train Ukrainian forces. We've equipped them. We've encouraged what I would call the suicidal nationalism that is so widespread in Western Ukraine as a means of provoking the Russians into stupid actions. And I think we've succeeded. So I just reject the notion that, well, we don't need a buffer. Well, if you're a Russian and you're trying to keep missiles and hostile forces away from your border, I think you do. And right now, I think it's very clear to Putin and the Russian population that we are extremely hostile. They see no evidence at all for even the remotest interest in a fair and equitable settlement.
Well, that settlement is going to be determined, as most of these conflicts are, by the relative positions of the opposing forces. In this case, the Ukrainians and the Russians.